Hey there team, Rob here from the Better SMB podcast. This week's episode we have a big focus on excellence in leadership, making it a sustainable thing for you and your business. It is a follow-on episode from the New Zealand Manufacturing Magazine article, The Last Word. Hey, before we go on to the full episode, please remember to support us by following, sharing this episode, the whole podcast, The Better SMB. That way we can grow what we're doing here to support you with more content and better guests. Thanks for listening. This episode, Why Your Business Can't Outperform Your Leadership, is pretty cool. Lots of nuggets for you to take away. Anyway, that's enough from me. On with the podcast.
Welcome back to the Better SMB, where we are working to become the go-to voice for SMB leaders looking to create high-performing and sustainable businesses. I'm David Alterner.
And I'm Rob Bull.
This episode is a follow-on to May's NZ Manufacturer article. Own it. Leadership is a personal responsibility, not a title. Our objective with the article was to challenge SMB owners and senior leaders to take personal responsibility for their performance, culture, and sustainability in their businesses. Ultimately, we talked about the idea that the shift begins with you. You can't scale a business by working harder. You scale businesses by leading better, lifting quality, being more efficient, becoming more effective, focusing on improving your business performance, being resilient, and creating a great culture. Now, these things don't start with systems or strategy. They start with the person in the mirror. When leadership is reactive, businesses become chaotic. When leadership is intentional, teams thrive. Now, Rob, I know this is a subject that you're just absolutely passionate about. And we started with this idea of the mirror test, where we were asking readers to reflect on how they've been showing up. Are they calm or chaotic and actually part of the chaos? What made you think of coming up with that idea?
Quite simply, it's pretty much the main reason why businesses and business owners specifically come to talk to us to get us into their organizations, because it is the one true constant of organizations not performing to their peak ability or capacity. And it all comes down to how involved is the leadership, how dominating or sort of that command and control leadership is taking place versus a fully engaged team-led organization. When we see chaos, it's quite often the arsonist is the firefighter, aka the leadership. Then we can even step it more specifically, the owner-manager.
And this is something that came out in my research as well, is this idea of the command and control style businesses that they just can't scale, where leadership needs to get out of the way of the business.
Yeah, scaling's a really interesting one. For us, it is about running the business, and a lot of business advisors will talk about this as well, is as soon as you start your business, as soon as you're starting to lead a team, you run it, you organize it, you set up the processes, the systems, as if it was an exit strategy. Quite simply, how can that team perform, make decisions, complete the operations, provide the goods, the services, whatever you're doing, with minimal management input? You always can have leadership, but not that management input. So how can they make those decisions, plan, execute, manage the quality, manage your interactions, the communications, setting the game plan every day with as minimal input or active input from the management team? Leadership's there to support, encourage, sure, but that's how we sort of run it. So you're planning the exit strategy. How can it operate without you involved?
I like that. We also introduced the NIB and EMA Wellbeing Survey. And when I was looking at the data behind that, there's some pretty scary stuff. 2 out of 3 employees are concerned about their financial security. 80% of employees say the cost of living crisis is negatively impacting them. 78%, nearly 80% of employees are experiencing problems sleeping in the last 3 months because of their work. 47%, or nearly half, talk about there not being enough staff in their workplace. Now, I know that that's something you'll probably want to jump on, but some of those statistics are quite scary when you start thinking about people in jobs where they're under financial stress. Their mind's not on the job. Their mind's not on doing better by their team, by their business. Their mind's on survival. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they're your indicators around what is actually truly happening in the organization. So close on 80% of people are losing sleep. They're getting stressed about something in their job. So what does that tell me? It tells me I need to ask questions around, okay, so how is the decision making going on? What's the transparency of where you're heading or what's going on in the organization, the trust, the confidence in the team by the leadership? Because you're losing sleep because you're stressed about something not going right, or that you haven't done something, or a mistake's been happening, or going back to that financial worries. It means that there is no transparency and no openness and no safe environment to raise issues, to talk about them and solving them as a team, because they obviously bottling something up that is creating those outcomes. So to me, they're just red flags that life, and you use the word culture, that the culture isn't there that aligns with high-performing teams.
And I think this aligns quite nicely with our last episode with Rachel as well, where she talked about this idea of this burnout epidemic. She talked about this idea of a burnout epidemic, where people are focused on being busy and focused on what's urgent. They're not focused on what's important.
Absolutely. And I'll throw in one more stat that I've used ad nauseum. So if those who have read my LinkedIn posts, etc., over the past years, you would be familiar with this. But Gallup has completed research over a couple of decades now and consistently have found that an engaged team perform 20% better, more productive than a disengaged team. So if we look at those NIB, EMA stats, they really align quite nicely, because if that's high, you're going to get an underperforming team. Where if those numbers are low, you're going to get a high-performing team. It goes back to that culture. Now, I know I've talked about it before on this podcast, as a culture is the agreed behaviors, expectations, and actions of a group of people at any one time. So when you've defined it really simply like that, it means that is problem solving, raising issues safely in a safe environment. If those are all there, or the leadership go out and talk about issues on the shop floor, not in the office, not in the meeting room, not in the boardroom, they go out there and be curious and collectively facilitate problem solving, that's engaging your workforce. So your engagement goes up, their performance goes up. We know that by research. And some of those other issues I would expect to come down. So that goes back into one of our previous episodes with Dave Bunting, and he talked about that discipline and deliberate actions, which aren't sexy, going out there, talking, seeing the problems for himself, talking to the team about how to fix it, what are the options, and let them do it.
And what you're talking about really is how you start moving from hustling, relying on individual performers to carry everyone, to start moving towards high performance. We move away from everyone relying on 2 or 3 people to the team starting to deliver results. And then if we can work on that team culture, the way things are done around here and the behaviors that people accept, then that's where the real high performance comes from.
Absolutely. And like I described right at the beginning, quite often leadership comes in as the hero and the solver of all issues, but in reality, they probably caused them right at the start with their lack of trust or willingness to share and unload some of the decision making. So when it comes to solving the issues too, everyone stops and waits for the hero to come in on their horse and make that magnificent save. But they also do it day in, day out, every week, every Friday. They'll pitch in to get that job out on time, high five each other, and then move on and rinse and repeat for the following week. And so that really leads on to that word sustainability. Is that a sustainable way to go? And that sort of builds on to what Rachel talked in her episode. Absolutely not. Counterintuitive part of all of this is you actually got to slow down and start removing yourself, figuring out why or how that process can be completed without your active involvement. Now, you can be overseeing it all, you can be making sure everything's ticking over, but you don't have to be actively involved. And how many leaders really start to freak out when they're not actively involved, when their fingerprints aren't on the job?
We need to move the idea that leaders are about producing units of production and get this idea that leaders should be creating leaders. Because if you can do that, then you start growing and scaling what your business can do. The other thing, and you talk about slow down to speed up, and Rachel's idea of working at human speed, these are all really, really great sayings or great mantras that you can start thinking about. The one I really like, the US Navy SEALs have a saying, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and then because it's the military, fast is deadly. But if you think about that, they spend a lot of time training, learning the job, rehearsing. Because they rehearse, it becomes muscle memory. Because it's muscle memory that then allows them to speed up. Then they can speed up because they don't need to think about what they're doing. They can think about what's next, right? So this is, we need to start modeling our businesses off these sort of ideas where we can slow down, start doing things properly. And you and I talk about this a lot. This idea of getting back to basics, doing the basics well, then scaling the right behaviors, not the wrong ones, because that's where the burnout, the stress, the anxiety, all these statistics that we're seeing all over the place show up.
Yep. And this will surprise you. I've been doing some reading around Toyota and specifically Toyota culture. And the first couple of chapters, and this is how intense that Toyota go. And you can break this down for any SMB, maybe not as intensive or as longitudinal as Toyota do, because you might not have the absolute capacity to do this. Apart from their rigorous recruitment process, which is multiple meetings, assessments, and getting the right people, not the right skills, but the right people, aka what Dave Bunting does. And then their onboarding is over a number of weeks and into a couple of months. So they do a lot of off-the-job training, simulation, right down to how to screw in the screws at the right torque levels. They practice stopping the production line as team members so they get confident at doing that, to get confident in problem solving. And once they've actually become proficient in all of those skills and proficient in understanding that that's what they're expected to do, is to solve all of those problems, once that happens, then the team members are allowed in the actual work area that they've been employed for. So breaking that down into SMBs, it is recruiting for the right attitude and the right sort of focus from team members, because, you know, yes, there will be specialist skills out there that you're employing for, but you can fine tune some of those skills. Then onboarding the team members. And before you can do that, then you've got to also standardize how the job is done. You've got to create standards, document them, but actually make them a living document so people can see them and actually your performance metrics are measured against them. I just whistled off in a few seconds, but that can take an organization 2 to 3 years to fully complete and then start embedding. That's how you can create a sustainable workforce. How a person completes a piece of paperwork or how they complete a specific job. This is for the New Zealand Manufacturing Magazine, so we can go right into the manufacturing. How do people complete a subcomponent build or anything like that? It's got to be solidly documented, create a standard, so then you can train to that. And once you've trained to that, people can actually see if they're performing at the right level or not. And if something's going wrong, then they have the ability to stop, pull in some team members to solve that problem, and then go again. Simple. Go back to what Dave Bunting said, and we're going to rinse and repeat a lot of Dave's comment. So Dave then said, deliberate, discipline, and it's not sexy.
Yep. Now, just a quick Google here. But Rob, Toyota employs 370,000 people globally. Before I hand over to you, I'll also throw this little nugget out there. Within Toyota's manufacturing operations, teams typically consist of 4 to 6 members. So that's quite an important thing. So if you've got a supervisor, they might have a series of team leaders between 4 and 6. Each of those team leaders has between 4 and 6 direct reports. I'm putting that out there as part of my question to you around, Toyota's this massive organization with all these resources, but at the same time, they've got all these tiny little operations. Talk about that. Talk about how maybe some manufacturing businesses that are out there may have that team leader supervisor ratio a little bit wrong.
In most New Zealand SMEs, sort of manufacturing organisations that I've seen anyway, the ratio probably isn't wrong because we've got small businesses and they might be 20, 30, 40 people at best on average. That would be your average solid engineering business, manufacturing business. There are obviously bigger and smaller. By nature of the beast, those team structures are probably there. What has gone wrong is in most places, we don't have standardised work. In Toyota, all of those supervisors, then the managers have all been trained on the shop floor because they recognise that is the job that's earning dollars, not management. Toyota see management as waste because it's not contributing to the actual making of cars that earn the money, but they recognise that there needs to be jobs done. If you're a manager, you'd come in, you actually get trained to work on the shop floor to understand what and how you're managing. They understand and get trained in problem solving. Flip side of that is in most places when I come in, people are telling teams what to do. That results in people waiting around until they get instructions or there's no autonomy or no decision making happening on the floor that those small teams should be able to do, because that's effectively what Toyota do, breaking it down to the smallest common denominator so they've got some quick and agile and nimble decision making and problem solving happening at any given time. But everyone's trained in the same way and in the same mindset of when there's a problem or something's not quite too standard, then everyone understands how to fix it together quickly and decent time, so then they can get on with earning money again, which is making cars. I don't think it's the size of the teams that are actually too different to what we see, but it's how the teams operate, communicate, and are led. And it's not team-led. Mostly in New Zealand SMEs, it's leadership, or I'll use the word management-led.
So that brings up an interesting idea around moving away from the term of management and moving towards leadership or even coaching. When you think about coach doesn't necessarily command. What they're trying to do is guard your focus so you can carry on with what you need to do. And they're modeling the expectations they've got of you while helping manage your energy to allow you to do your best. What do you think about that idea about people starting to maybe even get rid of the term manager and start talking about leaders or coaches?
Absolutely. We need organizations to get into the mindset that running a business, running an organization and producing something is a team game. And the experts, the decision making, and creating that culture that everyone has an ability to contribute, not just by producing their subcomponents or whatever their job is in the production line or the manufacturing process, but they've got ideas of how to make the job easier. They've got ideas to how to solve a problem that's been nagging everyone else, that everyone can equally, and that comes over time. So sometimes it's more David is improving it versus Rob's a bit quiet, but then I'll come to my own. But you've got to create that, and I've said it already a few times on this episode, we've got to create that culture where it's safe to raise issues, safe to talk about different ways of doing things, and safe to think of other ideas and giving it a go, because it won't always be successful. That is the leader, and that's the coaching. Quite often we go out there and we encourage business owners to coach their team. So when they go out and do their Gemba walk, so when they're walking around where the work is done, some of the first failures is the questions that they used. And they're going, oh, so what improvements are you doing this week? And they've asked a person who's never been asked that question, but they're a 20-year veteran in their job, and they just go possum and headlights on them because they just don't know how to respond to such a question going cold turkey. So you've got to build up that process. You've got to be that chief reminding officer every week going, hey, we want to hear your story. We want to hear your voice about how this can be done even better, and we will act on it. And you've got to remind them that that's okay. And over a period of time, instead of asking what improvements could they do or how could they do that better, ask them what bugs them. The team members will describe that, and then together you can figure out what actually that means, diagnose it, and problem solve it. And then you're getting that engagement, then you're getting into that coaching style, then you're asking the right or better questions that gets value out of your team. And that's quite the opposite to what we see with typical owner managers or leaders in an organization. They manage because they manage what they're measuring, which is output, profit and loss accounts, late orders, but they're actually not leading the team to solve those quality issues that really grind their organization down to a stop.
And I think potentially our leaders and managers are too tied to wanting to be the one who provides the answer.
Well, because they've been brought up in an environment where that was the expectations, that you were the expert. Once you get into that management role or that leadership role, that all of a sudden you're expected to know all the answers. So it's flipping it around on the head, really. And that takes a lot of guts for people to turn around and acknowledge that they might not be the experts. The experts are the ones still on the tools, and we need to respect that. So that is a tough mind shift. This isn't easy. It's not an easy thing to achieve. It's even okay, and I guess this goes against some of that Kiwiism, that machoism that we find is like, I've got to know everything, and I can't show weakness, and telling people that I don't know what I'm doing or I don't know what the answer is, that's weakness. Well, it's not. And we need to get past that mindset going, hey guys, I don't know what the solution is. I think we've got a problem here. What do you think? And that's confidence in the leadership. And that's having that maturity and that role modeling and understanding that that's okay. But we don't have that in enough quantity around our SMEs and our manufacturing sector.
Well, it's tough, right? Because you go, the leaders need to be looking out at the 3 or 4 big things. And Rachel talked about this idea of only having 3 priorities. If you take this a step further and look at it from 20 or 30,000 feet, what are the 3 or 4 big things that if you freed up the day-to-day grind, let's call it as a leader, and you can delegate that to your team, what could you focus on that would completely change your business in the next 3 to 5 years? Yep. If we can start getting that mindset rippling out across the business owners that listen to this podcast, we could start seeing some really phenomenal shifts, I believe, across our small business landscape.
Absolutely. I think I've mentioned it probably in a few episodes over the past year anyway. From a lean perspective, so lean thinking, we talk about leader standard work. And the real simple definition of that is, what is your standard as a leader? Where do you put and prioritize those key elements in that time? So taking what you've just said is design the perfect week. So if you were running an organization where the teams got these awesome standards, are hitting quality metrics, they're doing all the things that they've done, that, you know, when the issues come up, that they problem solve. So it gives you a lot of free time, I guess, and it's got yourself out of the weeds. What's that perfect week look like? And what are you doing in kind of quarter day blocks or 2-hour blocks? Design that perfect week. Put it up on the wall as your 2 to 3 year goal, almost as a strategy, your leadership strategy. And every time you can't achieve that, write what happened. I was supposed to be out on the shop floor doing my gimbal walk to look at quality issues and coaching the team between 10 and 12 on that Tuesday. I didn't get that done because the Monday orders were late. You write that down. Why were the Monday orders late, and why were you pulled into that problem? Is it because the team didn't have the confidence to solve the problem and they dragged you in? Solve that problem. And so over the next couple of years, you get closer and closer to that perfect week, which means that you're not in the daily weeds of operations. You're a lot more strategic. And that goes to the E-myth, right? You're playing in that entrepreneur role rather than the technician role.
Yep, or even the manager role. Because that issue, the orders are late. Okay, how do you think we fix this problem? Ask your team that.
Yep.
Okay, how about you try that and come back to me and let me know how that went. In whatever scenario a business owner or a business leader is having to put that trust in their team because they're used to doing that, that will probably scare the bejesus out of them. But it's only going to be the worst experience that first time, and it will actually get easier. And then as they can start letting a little bit more rope out, relinquishing a bit of control, that's where the time's going to get freed up.
I'll touch on that. Relinquishing control. No, I think they're probably gaining more control. It just doesn't feel like it, because as the team are working those problems more themselves, you've got more control of the whole business rather than those little components. And you've got that helicopter view as you described it. And you've got to reinforce and encourage and empower that change. So, okay, that went wrong. So what are you going to, what could be done? What are 3 things you've tried? You've got to rinse and repeat that process for a couple of months before they actually fully understand, trust that is expected of them, that is okay to go off and try something a little bit different to solve a problem before they actually raise it with you and then debrief with you going, X happened, we tried Y, and Z is the result. Yep, that's okay. Now, that takes a couple of months, even years, to flip that switch from, we've got a problem, can you come in, drop what you're doing, and help us solve it? It's not an overnight change of mindset or attitude or culture. This is why those changes and behaviors take a long time, particularly if you're in industries that, it's really been rock solid for decades.
What would you say to people who go, that sounds pretty soft? Don't know about that.
Why would it be soft? I think you've employed these people to do a great job. They've got the technical skills. All you're trying to do is give them the problem-solving time and ability and empowerment to actually not get you involved in what often are quite simple and straightforward solutions. The team just need an ability and have the confidence to think about different ideas and give it a shot. It's not soft at all. It comes with accountability, of course. Team members with that extra responsibility is accountability. They're accountable to make sure quality's hit. That's not soft. That's quite hard. I quite often tell business owners going, it's okay to set your standards, to set your expectations. Most of them find that conversation really hard. And part of that expectation is you're going to be the problem solver, not me. You're not going to ring me up when I'm out trying to tout for more business and bring me in because you've run out of screws, when you can quite easily solve that problem. Well, one, buy more screws, but then figure out why did we run out in the first place? And quite often, that's the reason why we find some of these quality issues and performance issues, because of simple issues like that.
And actually being able to let go and relinquish that control and that need to be the problem solver. It's helping you be significantly more strategic. The painful bit for the business owner is they're having to let their ego take a bit of a hit because they're not the one solving that problem. But they can also be the one landing that new client that's going to double your orders in the next 3, 6, 12 months or whatever it is. It's about growing, and all growth happens when you're outside of your comfort zone. And in some ways, we need our leadership to embrace this idea of getting a little bit uncomfortable so that we can grow and you can lift your team up with it.
And that goes back to some of the comments right at the start of the evening, is that this is all about creating a framework, set of processes, a system. When I say system, it's the collection of different, strategically different meetings that happen. Your toolbox meeting, go to that, but you do not lead it. You're there to empower the team, and also just sense check, have your radar on about who's tuned in today, who's might be seeming a little bit off, that you need to have that little quick one-on-one and give them that pep talk, versus your production meeting, which happens 2 or 3 times a week. You've got to set those standards. To me, that's the system of all of these interconnecting actions that are created, so you are not 100% involved in all the different decision makings, operations, and the detail. That as a leader, as an owner, you've got to get out of the way of your team. It's as simple as that. Failure of leadership is being a manager, not being a leader.
We've talked a lot about this idea that our business leaders are managers. They're not leaders. If we look at the statistics, 80% of employees experience problems sleeping. And that was in the last 3 months. So this isn't just leaders, managers. This is getting right down to the ground floor. So this idea of the hustle culture, the idea that we're all taking on too much is really quite obvious, I think. From looking at the statistics, we seem to have this burnout problem going through our businesses. How do you think we start to address this? What are some tools that you think would be worthwhile for leaders to pick up so they can start leading, not managing?
From my perspective, there are a couple of tools that are lean-based or certainly quality-based as well. And you've got your prioritization tools. There is the Eisenhower matrix, which is, is it easy to do to make improvements? Does it have a big impact? And you really focus on the ones that are easy, big impact, or even slightly harder, but a massive impact. And you focus and prioritize on those kind of improvement activities to get those results. I always mind the pun, but lean on the tool of leader standard work. You've got to set your ideal week out and work out how to achieve that as close to as possible. Then you've got to have that meeting structure. And this sounds really counterintuitive, of creating more meetings, but they're short and sharp. So your toolbox meeting, your stand-up meetings, call them what you want. But they're there to reset the game plan for the day, reset the expectations, and in 10 to 15 minutes, you understand that the team have got all the game plans, they've got all the issues, they've got all the goals, and they know what to do that day, so you can go away for the rest of the day and focus on what's important in your business. And that's your leader standard work, putting aside strategic time, putting aside business development time, rather than floating around and finding out all these different issues over a whole morning. It's just a complete waste of structure, time, and effort. Priority tools are absolutely a go-to. Problem solving and reflection. I was talking to a couple of clients last week, and I'm going to send out my reflection diary. And this isn't a sell point on the podcast at all, but you can find it on Amazon if you really want. But it's really reflecting on, did you hit your goals for the week? What went well? And really write down why. so you can repeat that. And you've actively got to write this out. And this isn't any warm, fuzzy, tree hugging exercise. This is deliberate action to understand how you're going as a leader so you can become a better leader, so you can get out of the way of your team so they can perform better. Now, part of that reflection is asking the opposite question, which is what didn't go well? And you've got to write 5 to 6 things that you did, probably didn't do, that contribute to that failure. Out of that reflection, what are you going to do to improve? What's your countermeasure to those actions or inactions that created the subpar performance? And only bit, by putting aside, that's a half an hour process on a Friday, you are going to become a better leader. So the tools aren't that dramatically complex, but they require discipline and deliberate action. As soon as you deprioritize those out of your day, you are going to work those longer hours. You are going to feel like you need to get on the shop floor. We are going to get those stats, which means that you're going to work till 10 o'clock at night to get the job done because you haven't collectively or individually refined your own practices as a leader. You just get on that hamster wheel and spin it around. And that's when we get that burnout, as Rachel talked about in her episode. That's when we get the whole mental health issues raising up, the general health issues, the personal health, all of those things just get bigger and bigger and bigger. What can you do? Just one action every week to break that cycle and work towards that ideal one. And it might be prioritize your tasks using those Eisenhower matrix or some form of derivative from that. Set yourself a limit on projects or new improvements. So if you're doing or implementing an ERP system, that's it from software. Don't try and do ERP, timesheets, 3 or 4 other projects. Limit every time, get it done, and then move on to the next one. Figure out which project is going to bring you the highest reward for the least amount of effort. So that's where the Eisenhower matrix kind of tool comes into play. And it's just absolute reflection and improvement. It's as simple as that.
And if we take what you've outlined there, where you talk about designing your perfect week, it flows quite nicely into what the 4 steps Rachel had. This idea of if your perfect week looks like whatever, but then you're going to triage your tasks, you've only got 3 priorities you're working on. You're protecting your peak energy, which kind of comes back to that scheduling, right?
Yep.
Rest is a strategy, so you're not working until 10 at night, you're delegating to the team. And then the piece that's not in there that you touched on is reflection.
Yep.
What went well, what didn't, what needs to change. If leaders starting to do that, I think we'd find that could start trickling through the different businesses that we've got out there that have got 4 out of 5 team members struggling to sleep. And we could see that starting to reduce, because if the leaders got less stress, then that starts to go through the organisation.
Yep. Now, the investment to kickstart that off might be getting your whole teams or your sub-teams. We did this with a client the other day. You don't have to have consultants floating around and paying for them. Putting time aside, it might be a couple of hours for the whole team or an hour per team, and just sitting down with them and going, hey, this is what I want the organisation to start doing. This is what I am hoping you guys will start to pick up. And I'm going to work hard myself. I won't be perfect, but these are the new expectations. Setting that stake in the ground of change and something's new going to happen and how it's going to benefit for the team. So what's in it for them? You've got to articulate that carefully and then start working on solving all of the reasons why it's not happening and acknowledge them, face up to them, and just work it out. So the investment is that slowing down, a little bit of time to set the marker and set the expectations, set the true north, and then work with the team to create that environment that you really want to happen. And that's going to benefit your organization, because if you are thinking of selling in 5, 10, 15 years, You're creating an exit strategy, but you're adding value in the organization because it's not reliant on you. So all of this is going to pay off, and hopefully so is your stress. You're going to be better, healthier.
So it all starts with the mirror. The bad news, your success is up to you. The great news, your success is up to you. Remember, if you're going to lead at an unsustainable pace, it slows down your whole business. The way you lead is mirrored by the team. Burnout, it's contagious. If you're on that path, chances are your team are too. Moving to a model of sustainable leadership is a strategic advantage. Slow down so you can speed up. You don't need to be perfect, just willing to grow. Start with one small change. What's your first step going to be? Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Better SMB.